Hello, I'm Nan Simonson, and I'm a nationally board certified health and wellness coach working with a lifestyle medical practice called Blue Zones Health. And I focus on the pillars of health that can actually affect us just as much as the food that we eat. Food, of course, nourishment, of course, is one of the pillars, but there are other pillars of health. Today, we're going to talk about the food, and today we're going to focus on dealing with cravings and the thoughts behind them. I have a group of people I meet with every Thursday, and we call the meeting how well I used the title well more than a year ago, and we've still done it weekly, of Power Points, points of interest as it relates to lifestyle as medicine. And the group is all there in the background. And when I finish this training segment that I'm recording for you, we will all gather again and talk about this. Well, that group last week while I was on holiday came up with a list of things they wanted to talk about. And this was one of them. And I think this is an important subject because we're coming up to the holidays. As a matter of fact, while I was away, I was with family, and it was during the Halloween week. And speaking of cravings, we went out trick-or-treating, and there was a 5-year-old and then two little babies, a 10-month-old and a 12-month-old. Well, they were oblivious, but the 5-year-old couldn't keep his eyes off of the candy. And his mother had, or who has a little chest right next to the door, had the candy bowl on top of that chest for almost 3 days. And the little boy, they had to keep fighting him to leave it alone. And I finally said to my husband, I'm the one that's looking at that constantly thinking, wow, there's Snickers in there. I used to love Snickers. In other words, I had a craving. What is the point of that? That descriptive, that is, as Chef AJ says, if it's in your house, eventually it will be in your mouth, because I don't know that I ever would have taken a piece of candy. And if I did, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But I have, since beginning with our clinic and becoming whole food plant-based in my dietary and lifestyle, I haven't eaten sugar. I've avoided it. And I'm not saying I never have, but in other words, I don't go out of my way for it. And in this, I'll say description, there are 10 points I'm going to make as it relates to dealing with food cravings. One of them absolutely deals with the effect of sugar, and I don't want to deal with that. So let me begin. I'm going to begin by, and I'll be off and on reading my notes because I wrote this down and I don't want to miss what I mean to say. Dealing with food cravings, especially if they can conflict with specific health goals, that's me, or dietary restrictions, involves understanding both the physical as well as the psychological triggers behind them. Here are a few strategies that may help if you find that you're in that situation, as I was, looking at that bowl of candy for 3 days thinking, get it out of here. Recognize and pause. When a craving arises, try to pause for a minute to assess it. Ask yourself if you're physically hungry or if it's an emotional response. For me, I would have not been hungry. And would it have been an emotional response? Not necessarily, unless you call a memory an emotional response. I remember during my eat anything you want days, which also had to do with eating disorder days, which left me, well, more than 6 years ago. I left it behind. I used to love Snicker bars so much that I kept one in my glove compartment. Well, only in the winter. In the summer, that wouldn't work in Southern California. And I would, if I did a drive-through of coffee, because I love the coffee and chocolate, I would take my Snicker bar, take a bite of it, and put it back in, and that would last me for an entire week. So Snickers and I go back a long way. In that way, I looked at the Snicker, that entire box of or bowl of candy. The only thing that spoke to me was that, and it was the memory. It was my liking it, but it was certainly not hunger. So consider evaluating when you're feeling an urge, a to or a craving, to look at where that response could be coming from. Sometimes it's a signal from your body you are truly hungry, in which case you can make decisions and choices. But at other times, it's triggered by stress, boredom, or in many cases, habit. Second, recognize that junk food, highly processed food, is the most addictive and destructive drug on the planet. Let me tell you what I mean. Dr. Doug Lyle talks about this. Dr. Goldner, whose protocol I followed for 6 weeks. I've had very, very good results with it, and I'm keeping part of her protocol going. Both he and she have cited rat studies that have proven that dopamine, which is triggered by sugar. As a matter of fact, we humans have dopamine receptors in our stomach. In other words, as soon as something hits it, that lights up that dopaminergic urge. We not only feel joy and I'm not going to call it comfort from it. It lights us up, but it also triggers us to want more. It's a motivational hormone or neurotransmitter, not just a reward transmitter. And those sugar receptors in our stomach are easily triggered by sugar. So they did a rat experiment. They gave rats cocaine, they gave rats sugar. The rats ultimately became hooked more on the sugar than they did the cocaine. They would prefer the sugar to the cocaine to their ultimate death. And sugar can do the same thing to us, maybe not kill us, but in essence, that study shows the power of sugar. Our bodies are made to, well, let me go back. Recognize that junk food, highly processed food, is the most addictive and destructive drug on the planet. And that's why we can say this: higher addictive rates than cocaine. Our bodies are made to respond favorably to eating, but not to get high on food. Dr. Doug Lyle and Dr. Goldner say that the only way to reverse addiction and cravings is to stop eating the food you're addicted to. Dr. Goldner says, as long as you have even a little bit of cocaine, slash or finger quotes, sugar, you will be addicted to cocaine. If you continue to have a little, you'll continue to be addicted. Dr. Doug Lyle and Dr. Goldhammer wrote a book, The Pleasure Trap, that deals with this very specifically. And what they say is, if you have even a little of a thing that triggers you, you will forever be wanting more and more of that. And the only way to stop that addictive behavior is to simply not have that food. Okay, that's easier said than done. I know you're thinking that. You may be thinking, but I miss the food I love. And one response could be, but that food does not love you back. That food can and will make you sick, make you always craving something and more of that something. That had a lot to do with my eating disorder. And that it takes time to adapt, to neuroadapt. As a matter of fact, many people say it takes up to 30 days of eating in a certain way, adapting to the flavors before it actually becomes what we can call your food. Doctor, or she's not a doctor, oh, I can't remember the name of the person I'm referring to. Esther Loveridge wrote a book as she traveled the path through Dr. McDougall's program, Quick Weight Loss, and she lost 80 pounds, and then she went on to lose 120. She's kept it off for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And one of the things that she said again and again in her book that actually journal was a journal of each of her first 100 or 365 days on his program. She said again and again, that's not my food. Dr. Goldner says of this that when she decides she doesn't eat that as food, she will look at it the way she would look at a buffet of cat food. In other words, that's not food, and move on. I have learned what is my food and what I'm willing to put in my body, not just for nutrition. As a matter of fact, I learned a lot on Dr. Goldner's program about what we can control with pointed nutrition, but I'll leave that for another, probably another talk, or maybe just another reference, but a light reference on this talk. But as I learned, if I had certain foods, they made me uncomfortable. If I had had that Snicker bar, it would have made me uncomfortable. Why? Because of the dopaminergic urge to then give me more of that. Just give me another one. In other words, it creates stress. It creates discomfort. When we know that and when we can see that and when we internalize that, it makes it easier to make good decisions. All right, but there's more to it than that. Balancing our blood sugar. I learned as I went through the recovery from my eating disorder that I had to eat adequately. After over 50 years with an active eating disorder, bulimia, I was able to stop. I was told I probably would never be able to stop, but I was able to stop because once our mind, our lower brain, our limbic brain is used to certain behaviors, it sets them as habit, and quite often it's hard to break it because that's the first response that comes up. And we tend to believe it when our brain motivates us forward. What she said in her book, Brain Over Binge, is that the urges can be ignored. The more we ignore them, the more they fade, and the more we start paying attention, and the urges come from this limbic brain that makes our heart pump, makes our digestion work, makes our lungs breathe. That's all limbic system. And the limbic system loves continuity. Whatever you create, and this has to do with habits, whatever you create as a normal behavior, it kind of wants to maintain the status quo. Changing it makes it uncomfortable. When we change it and we continue, in my case, in this case, to ignore an urge, we get stronger at ignoring it. We don't fight it. We don't go out of our way to give it a lot of attention. We just realize where it's coming from. That's old story. That's not what I do. And you move on, find other things that make you happy, comfortable, satisfied. And we'll talk about self-care. Before you know it, that urge disappears. It doesn't mean it disappears forever. I remembered my Snicker bar preference. And so it brought it up. And this was, I haven't had a Snicker bar maybe in, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years. I'm not really sure. It's been a really long time. But the point is, I didn't act on it in any way other than it went through my mind and right out of my mind again, because that's not my food. Eating adequately is her second recommendation. Ignore the urges, and eventually your prefrontal cortex, the one that plans things, the one that understands ramifications and consequences, kicks in. But also eat adequately. If our urge is about hunger, is about a imbalanced blood sugar, is about poor nutrition overall in our body needing to heal, it's going to urge us to eat. Just eat anything. We need to eat adequately and well in order for that to stop. Well, at the same time I read her book, I transitioned to whole food plant-based, and I was determined to do it cleanly. In other words, whole food. That's different than vegan. This is vegan, but it's different than vegan because vegan is a free-for-all. Give me fries, a Coke, a Slurpee, and ooh, let's throw in some Oreo cookies. Those are all vegan. That has nothing to do with health. But whole food plant-based says a lot. It says that it is the whole food as close to nature as possible. It is unprocessed because that's not a whole food, which includes a lot of the oils and certainly sugar. And it specifies healthy, balancing food. That can make a difference. Eat adequately, maintain a balance between your carbohydrates, your fat, your proteins. You don't have to pay a lot of attention to that, but it's a good idea to understand if you have something that's going to burn up fast, like an apple, maybe a few almonds with that will help slow it down. Maybe a spread of nut butter on it might help slow it down. I'll just leave it at that. Make sure you get enough sleep. It has been proven that people that are sleep deprived tend to have a more active response to ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hormone that makes you feel hungry. And people who are sleep deprived usually are looking for food all the time. And this is one of the reasons why. It's physiological. So get enough sleep. Take care of your body that way. Number 5, plan for cravings. Instead of avoiding foods entirely, have healthy substitutes that can satisfy cravings while keeping you on track. For example, if you're craving something sweet, have fruit around, have a smoothie, have a small portion of a treat that is within your dietary restrictions. I did a video on YouTube, what I eat in a day, on Dr. Goldner's protocol. This is Dr. Goldner, and I'm going to mention her a little while from now. And one of the things that I made was from her cookbook, Goodbye Lupus, Hello Delicious, and they are foods, meals that are compliant to her protocols. And I'm not going to go through any of that. I have that in as a list of links in many of my most recent videos. In any case, one of those recipes was something that her son Alec made, and it's cacao powder, and banana, a whole banana, cacao powder mashed together. And I have these little papers that I put into square silicone ice cube trays. So, and I had one before I started here. I had my lunch, huge salad, had my smoothie. I've been drinking most of the day. And I had a glass of, I think it was Ticino caramel something or other. Ticino is an herbal tea blend of all kinds of interesting things, and there are a number of flavors. But I've always liked a little sweet. Well, out of the freezer, I got my little teeny square of banana cacao that I call a chocolate cookie. And I was able to take that with my little sip, and I was done. It was one slice of banana with maybe a half a teaspoon of cacao, which doesn't have sugar and is actually an antioxidant kind of a food. So plan on cravings, plan on what would satisfy you. Don't be afraid of the elements of the macronutrients. Don't be afraid of healthy fats like some avocado or some flax or chia seeds, which actually were directed to on her protocol because of the omega-3 fatty acids. Don't be afraid of the carbohydrates, like a sweet potato or like a squash. kombucha squash baked with a tiny bit of either date paste or maple syrup as a light sweetener. It's just a marvelous kind of a very satisfying, balancing food. Or, of course, the proteins from things like baked tofu or tempeh, edamame. Okay, mindful eating. Sometimes cravings are more about the act of eating than the food itself. Eating mindfully can help you enjoy each bite, tune into your body's signals, and feel satisfied more quickly. In other words, get the screens, as they say, in blue zones. And I'm becoming a certified blue zone advocate for our blue zone health clinic that I am a health coach with, but also because our community is becoming a certified blue zone. And I'll be working with a group of people to bring that about. I'm really excited about that. And with the blue zones, it is understood that it's our environment and what's around us and what we have available that tends to direct how we're going to behave. In other words, their simplistic response to what I'm talking about is have the healthy choice be the easy choice. We'll leave it at that. Stay hydrated. That's another reality. Often thirst can be mistaken as hunger or cravings, and sometimes even lack of energy. We simply need to keep hydrated. And that's an open subject. Some people think, well, hydration means that you drink 8 glasses of water a day. That's 64 ounces. On Dr. Goldner's protocol that I did beautifully with. And what I mean is I reversed a situation, an inflammatory marker from ultra high to normal, even low normal. And I did it on the protocol. Her protocol begins the hypernourishment at 96 ounces of water a day. I have it with me all the time. And with the water in my smoothie, glasses of water and flasks of water, I now have about 115 ounces of water a day. And it absolutely does change what I used to perceive as hunger or urges, because it satisfies our body throughout. And it gets the healing process moving freely when there's enough fluid in us for our cells to be hyperhydrated and capable of change and autophagy, which means getting out the old dead parts of the cells and establishing new ones. Staying hydrated may help you reduce the frequency of certain cravings. Next, practice self-compassion. Cravings can bring up guilt or frustration, especially if you're working within dietary guidelines. Instead of fighting cravings with willpower alone, try to approach them with curiosity. Ask yourself why you're craving certain foods without judgment, and remind yourself that occasionally cravings are simply natural. So in other words, evaluate what's going on. And we're going to talk a little bit more about another side of that subject. Evaluate emotional needs, and that's the other side. If cravings are consistently emotional, try to find alternative ways to meet these needs, connecting with loved ones, engaging in creative activities, taking time for self-care, sometimes fulfilling what cravings are trying to satisfy, or self-care, sometimes fulfilling what cravings are trying to satisfy, when we're missing any one of these markers of, I'll say, need in us. And finally, Dr. Goldner's, I'll say prescriptive. She has 2 books that outline her program. One is Goodbye Lupus. The other is Goodbye Autoimmune Disease. This is the food protocol. This is the food protocol, but then the rest of it, a good part of the book, is the emotional and mental part of healing. She acknowledges, now she's an MD, she's also a board certified psychiatrist as well as neurologist. She's also a trauma specialist, and she's also an expert in cellular growth and recovery. And she wrote this book because when she was meeting with people using the protocol that some healed beautifully with and some had a much more challenging time, what she realized was that the people that had a challenging time had more going on emotionally that was interfering with their healing than the results of what they were eating or how well they were following the protocol. In other words, they had things going on emotionally that affected the adrenals, that affected digestion, and interfered with anything else that they did right. So in her book, she has sections, and she addresses, I don't know, 2 dozen, well, I'll say about a dozen things that interfere with healing. One of them being, and this is a quote, identifying and eliminating unsupported thoughts. And I'm just going to give you a synopsis of what some of them are. She calls it the shouldings, SHOULD, should-ings. In other words, carrying and either adopting or carrying or supporting a mindset that keeps a reel running in your mind that uses that word should. Well, he should have, that should have, it could have, should have been. In other words, spending a lot of emotional energy on something that we either couldn't control or that whether or not we could control it simply was what it was. In other words, it wasn't something we can change. She believes that, and she says it in here, that our perception of a thing is far more important than what that thing is. And for some people, they perceive just about everything in a mode that keeps them doubting whatever happened and the veracity of whatever happened because it should have been different. Her recommendation is stop and make a list of all the things that throughout a day, throughout a week, you say should be different, and look at what you're doing and decide what you can do to change that around, how you can change your perception to take life as it is rather than fight it all the time. Fortune telling, that, but playing it forward. In other words, believing that you can figure out how a thing's going to happen and therefore maybe not go into it. Well, I'm not going to do that because I won't be good at it. Or I tried that, it's not working, so I'm going to stop doing it. She used examples of some of her patients that did things like that. And then she used the example of people that don't even give things a try because they predict in advance bad results. She talks about disqualifying the positive. I had a conversation like that with a group I ran this morning, and it was brought up a couple of times by different members, the stress that they felt. This is the week of the 11th of November. In other words, last week was our elections, and our elections happened, and we have a new president-elect, and some people were satisfied and some people were not satisfied. And the results of that election carried through some very negative emotional responses in these people for the entire week. What she talks about is, rather than focusing on what it is that is not positive, to look at instead at all of the things we have in our life that we can be grateful for, that are beautifully positive, that are sustaining the belief that, and one of the things she talks about, and I'm not, well, okay, I'll say this. Dr. Goldner lost a child last year. I can barely say that without getting teary. And when she speaks of understanding that life can be hard, but any one of us can find a way to see the joy that is left, the things that really matter. When we see the power that we have in us to do that, and she has clearly done that, this isn't just verbiage, you realize that we are in control of our future emotionally and our health today and emotionally. Why am I getting to this deep level? Because this has a lot to do with cravings. Because when we feel depleted, when these things are our norm, the shoulding, the predicting ahead, the lack of being able to view sunshine because of the darkness we feel is around us. Another one is the all or nothing thinking. Instead of looking at how much I've gained, I'll look at the fact that I didn't gain enough, and therefore it's all or nothing. If I don't do it all the way, there's no value in what I did at all. You put all of that together, and we end up with people that can live their lives in these emotional, I'll say in emotional barbed wire, where everywhere they turn, they're getting pricked. Her point is, take the time to note it, write it down, evaluate what you can do to change it. And if it's so embedded, consider cognitive behavioral therapy, where we are taught to look at things differently psychologically. Some of this you can do on your own, some of it can't be. What a heavy topic for this subject, but it's relevant and valid. And then finally, cravings can be challenging, especially if you're navigating health restrictions and digestive issues. Exploring the thoughts and emotions behind them is a gentle and effective way to shift habits over time without feeling deprived. One way or another, if we understand what good nutrition is and what it can do for our body and how it can allow us to live our life, and decide what that's going to be in our life, what is your food, what isn't your food, eventually you can walk away from the things that don't serve you, fall out of love with the things that don't like us at all, and fall in love with the foods that love us back. I think that's all I have to say. And I appreciate your time and attention. Again, I'm Nan Simonson. This is my book, Aging Powerfully. And Powerfully is a 10-letter acronym for 10 lifestyle modalities, all of which, in one way or another, help us live our lives well as pillars of good health. Give me a thumbs up if you like this, subscribe, share it, and have a great day, because I know I'm going to. Bye-bye.